So guys, over the weekend we had a snow and ice storm come through, and sometimes ice in our area will cause a lot of tree limbs to fall and we'll have massive power outages. So in turn, if you have no power, no way to cook food, if you don't have a gas generated stove, or you don't have an outdoor grill that has plenty of gas in the tank, you need one of these. It is an emergency cinder block or concrete block stove or a rocket stove, and it works very well. There's one component that makes it work at its best optimal level, and that's this right here. It's really easy to pick up. You can find these at any hardware store, but this really does work well for an emergency situation. And some people cook on them regularly, but there's some rules you need to follow if you're going to do this, because these can be dangerous. And I'll tell you the one thing you can buy to make it less dangerous. Now, before we get started, I want to demonstrate something by letting you see something very plainly. These blocks can crack. At the best case scenario, they would just crack. The worst case scenario is they could literally explode if they have a lot of moisture in them. As you can see, this block right here has been out in the open air. It's very dry and there's no moisture in it, but this one was sitting directly on the ground, and that's where you have a lot of danger. If there's a lot of moisture inside of here and it gets really hot, you could have, at the very, like I said, at the very least, it can just crack. At the worst, it could just have an explosion because it has so much moisture in it. So that's one thing you need to remember, is to make sure the concrete block you're using is completely dry. The second safety feature I'll tell you about, there is a ceramic type of, it looks like cloth, but you could line the inside of this with that ceramic cloth. If you're going to do this more than once, you probably need to go to your store and buy some of that. I'll put a link in the description so you can buy some, but that will keep the heat from heating up these sides of your ceramic blocks to an extreme level. So that's really something, I believe it's something similar to like kiln material. It's very, very fire resistant, and it helps keep the heat from not being quite so hot around the edges where we're going to do our cutting. And I'll show you that in just a second on exactly what to do regarding your concrete block that's going to be the chimney part, or the fire portion where it's going to come in contact with your blocks. Now, I believe I said ceramic blocks. I meant to say concrete blocks. We've never actually referred to these around my area as cinder blocks. We always call them concrete blocks. I assume that's what they're made out of, just common concrete. But anyways, there is a very specialized type of block you can buy, and those are masonry fire blocks. And you can also buy masonry cement, masonry fire cement that can take extreme heat. These are not designed for extreme heat. This is just an emergency situation if you find yourself in a need where you have to cook things and you have no way to do it. But if you're going to do this over and over on a daily basis, that's when I would say go to your hardware store and get those specialty type of fire blocks made for fireplaces that can tolerate thousands of degrees, and you can heat them over and over without having to worry about an explosion. Now, you may have to configure the blocks a little differently. They're not going to look exactly like this, but you can still make it work. So that's just what I would recommend. The last safety option I would absolutely recommend is wearing eye protection. Now, if one of these, even a small piece, just breaks off and shoots into the air and it hits you in the eye, it could be a trip to the emergency room. So that's the fourth thing I would say, is make sure you're wearing eye protection while you're doing this. Now, the first thing you have to do is you want to remove the end of one of your blocks. And this block right here, let me see if I can match it back up. I believe that's the side. That's how it was originally. But what I did is I took my reciprocating saw, or my pruning saw as I call it. I use it a lot around the house to prune things. You can see that it's very dull now. I took two new blades. These are just wood blades, and it dulled it down, but it did manage to cut all the way through like that. It would be preferable to use a masonry saw, specifically designed for cutting into masonry blocks like this. So this took a little bit longer than probably a masonry blade, but it did work. And of course it wore it down like I said, but you have to remove the end of one of your blocks like this. Now, there's other ways to do that. You could take a chisel and lightly hit it with a hammer with a chisel going into it, and maybe it would break free cleanly and give you a nice, fairly straight edge. This isn't perfect, but it's a pretty good edge there. Another way you can do it is just, if you don't even have a chisel, you could take a hammer and try to break it apart at the middle, and maybe it'd break free like that and give you a clean break. That's going to be a lot harder to get it exactly like that. But that's, again, the first step is cutting the end off of your block so you'll have be able to put your fuel into the masonry block. And again, like I said earlier, if you can get some of that ceramic cloth to put inside there, that would make it a little bit safer, because this is inside of it's going to get really hot on all three sides there. Now, this is the basic configuration, and some people use less blocks, some people use more, but I want the area where I'm going to be cooking to be as high as possible, because I don't want to have to bend over the whole time or kneel down. So you can get away with doing one of these in a much smaller number of blocks, but for me this is the most convenient and easiest way to use it. I've put the 2 blocks on bottom of the entire stack horizontally that I think have the most moisture. So I don't want to use these where they're going to come in contact with a lot of fire. I want to keep them away from the flame. These are my newer concrete blocks that I found out back, and I think these are very dry. This is our cut block that where we're going to have our burn chamber here. This is where we're going to feed our fuel into the burn chamber, and we want the burn chamber to have as much oxygen as possible. So that's why I talked about this earlier. This is just a common piece that you can get at your hardware store, and it's basically just a dryer vent connection. I had some dryer vent issues, and I thought, well, maybe I can do something else with it. And I think it's perfect for this type of rocket stove, because we want to get as much oxygen to the fire where it's going to be burning right here, and even some a little bit further back, maybe in this area. So we want to put this into our chamber, and we want to feed our fuel, our sticks and twigs on top of that. So we may have to flatten this out just a little bit, but we're going to have that fuel, that oxygen going in here and really feeding the fire. I've done this many times to get a fire going really well. I'll sometimes have a fire where it's a lot of wet wood, and I'll take my leaf blower, my gas powered leaf blower, and just blow it directly into the fire, and you'll have an incredible heat and incredible fire in just a matter of minutes. It really helps. So anyways, that's what we're doing. We're going to feed oxygen under our fuel. We set this underneath where we're going to have our fuel source, the twigs and things that I've collected. They're a little damp, but I think they'll still work great. I've got a fire starter that you probably may have never thought about before, but I'll show you that as well. It has a lot to do with this piece right here, the fire starter. And so we're going to put that in there. We're going to put one more block on top to raise it up a little bit more, to make it a little bit easier to work with, so we're not bending over the whole time. So we're going to add a little bit of space to our chimney that matches up with our hole beneath. It's a lot easier to work. You're able to stand up completely and have your grill right here. And I'll show you the piece of metal that I'm using as my grill. That comes in really handy. Now this piece right here came off of my gas barbecue grill, and my wife keeps it pristine. This thing is 3 or 4 years old, and she is just a fanatic on cleaning things, so I really appreciate that she does such great things like that for me. But we want to raise this just slightly off the block so we can allow, so it's not quite smothering it. Now I don't think it's going to smother the fire out, but we just want to raise it up a little there. So we're going to use a couple of these bolts, something we don't have to worry about burning. We can use this on both sides. You know, if it seems like it's moving, if your platform is not perfectly level, you can use something like this, a copper fitting that's not going to go anywhere. Mine is not quite level, so I'm going to go with the copper fittings because I see it's trying to roll off. I don't have a perfectly level ground area. So just these copper fittings will raise up our grill just a little bit. This side has a little bit of an arch to it. This side is flat, so either way, whatever side you want to do. But you can do that right there, kind of balance it. You could use any number of things. I've got something over here like these mason jar lids. You could use that as well, 4 of these. So there's so many different things you could use to elevate it just slightly off the top of the block. And that's going to help expel some of the gases and things that are coming out. But once the fuel is burning at its optimum temperature, you'll see less smoke. So it really works well when you have that dryer vent. Now what I was talking about earlier, I'll show you right now. So guys, the next thing I want to show you is this dryer lamp. My wife saves this, and we have tons and tons of it, and it makes an excellent fire starter. Very, very good for that. So instead of throwing that away, it's something you could use. Just store it in like a 5-gallon bucket with a lid, or you could put it in a box. I have a huge box of it in the garage next to our dryer, so we have a lot of this we can use if we need it as a fire starter, because I do a lot of campfires in our fire pit. So in addition to what I'm talking about the dryer lint, I'm going to put some of that in there in the bottom, right where our oxygen is going to be funneling in or coming in through our dryer vent. And we're just going to put a lot of pine straw on top of that to kind of act as a further kindling. And remember, wear your glasses. And I'll show you what I've done with this. I've kind of shaped this into a box shape so it fits better. We can put our fuel on top of it, and it's going to draw in that cool, cold air below the fire and help feed the fire oxygen, like I said earlier. So this is maybe a critical component that a lot of people do not use in rocket stoves. So let's put that back in our burn chamber as far as we can. And then next we're going to put in our fuel, our larger sticks, into the front. I'll bring you around to that side. Again, before you get started, don't forget your safety glasses. So I've got a bucket of sticks I've collected from around the yard. They're not too big, a little bit larger than your finger, but I'm just gonna put those in there as far as I can. And on top of this, I'm gonna put a little bit more of the dryer lint, different sizes, because we want it to really work well, and I might feed some more in there once it gets started. So to the left side, I'm gonna put a little bit more of the dryer lint just to the left, help it get started there. And I'm going to show you my favorite lighting device. Matches are always a problem for me, whether there's a slight wind blowing or wood is wet. So I'll show you the thing that I often use to light fires. So just a common kitchen torch works so well. You don't have to have the big tanks. You can just have something small like this in your kitchen drawer, so when you need it, it works really well. And once it gets to burning really well, you're going to see less smoke, but we have to get the fuel up to temperature. Now you might see more smoke on this because there's so much moisture in it. All right, so you can see there's a lot of air being drawn in from below, and that's what I attribute the dryer vent piece that we put in there. It's allowing it to feed more oxygen in there and help produce less smoke. I don't know if you can tell, but up above this flame, there's zero smoke right now. All right, I'm going to do a boil test just to see how long it takes us to get some water boiling. So we're going to fill this stainless steel container about half filled, and I'm going to time it and see about how long it takes to boil. Probably is about maybe 4 or 5 cups of water. Now it's really starting to perform as it should. The smoke is starting to dissipate, the fuel is getting up to the proper temperature, and we have minimal smoke. There's going to be a little bit of smoke because this wood is really wet, but it's drawing in that fresh oxygen from the tube we have below our fuel source. In a second, I'm going to show you what can happen to these concrete blocks if they get overheated. I'll show you an example at my fire pit, but first let's take a look, see if our water is beginning to boil. As you can see, we're starting to get the beginning of some boiling. It's not a rolling boil, but it is getting hot enough. This water was actually refrigerated before I brought it out, so it was a little bit colder than normal. It was not room temperature at a normal temp, but it is starting to boil, and it'll take a few more minutes and it'll be at a nice rolling boil. I also want to give you a view down inside the burn chamber. You can see the fuel is burning nicely. I'm going to back away and show you. Right now there is almost no smoke. It's minimal, maybe that of a birthday candle, but it's really starting to burn well. I'll bring in a little bit closer there, and you can see that once the fuel becomes really ignited, burning well, you have minimal smoke and you have the perfect stove to cook around. Also, our water is starting to boil a little better, so we'll take one more look at it in just a sec. Now, I also want to say that you could actually get away with making this with 4 blocks. You could remove the 2 blocks off the bottom. They're there just to elevate the cooking platform so you're not having to bend over quite so far. But if you wanted it even higher, almost at waist height or slightly above, you could add 2 more blocks to the bottom. Really critical on this point is you need to make sure you're on a solid surface. You don't want to do this in soft ground because the whole thing could collapse over on its side. All right, so there you go, a nice rolling boil after less than 10 minutes. And so you could cook whatever you want. Emergency situation, again, these blocks are not designed for everyday use, so you need to take precautions because you will get cracking, and there's always the chance of explosion if, and this is a big if there's too much moisture in the blocks. All right, let's do some temperature readings here. The base of our pot is about 350 degrees. Down inside the burn chamber, it looks like it is a little hard to see there, I know on camera, but I'm trying to do 2 things at once here. It looks like it's about 500 degrees in there. I've seen it pop up a little bit more than that. The point at which our fuel is inserted, 475 at the entrance to that. So it's a little hard to get an exact reading here at the entrance to the burn chamber, but I did see what appeared to be close to 900 degrees. But this is a great emergency stove. If you have to have an emergency heating situation, this is perfect because you can assemble this in a matter of minutes. You can cook your meals and go back inside. Again, this is not an everyday solution. It's a good emergency, power outage, you know, hurricane, tornadic, ice storm, whatever happens, this would be a great backup system to your ability to cook food if you needed it. So guys, our fire has died down. Now we've just got some really hot coals. It's perfect cooking temperature. You could use things like apple wood, hickory, and you could actually use this as a grill if you're just cooking directly on the grill. A lot of people will use stovetop, the things that you set pots and pans on, those type of burners, but I like using this type of grill. So if I decided to cook hamburger, a steak, whatever, and I wanted to use this at emergency, I would have it there. So just remember, yeah, those stovetop type of grates are great, but if you want to be able to cook almost like you were cooking on just a standard grill top, use something like this. It'll work a little bit better. So guys, this is my fire pit, and I've burned probably well over 1,000 fires inside of this pit, and some of them have got really close to the edge, and you can see these concrete landscape stones have broke apart, very similarly made to the cinder blocks or concrete blocks. So I've never had an explosion, but I have seen them just chip off like this because they became so hot and they had too much moisture inside the blocks. So I always try to keep the fire away from these. But again, you can use the specific type of blocks you can find at hardware stores that are specifically made for high heat. You can also use refractory cement if you wanted to form your own blocks or make your own emergency stove. So again, what I just showed you is a temporary fix. Using the right type of refractory cement or fire bricks would work much better than using just standard concrete. So one last thing I wanted to mention is you can go by your local grocery store and pick up accessories like this for grills. If you don't have a grill, you can pick up something like this for less than 10 bucks. This is a thing that you can either put fish on top of your grill where the fish won't fall down into it, or you can use it for vegetable cooking. But you use something as simple as this as your stove top. Remember, you want to elevate it slightly off the concrete block. So guys, I really appreciate you watching. If you have any questions about this video or any previous video, I do lots of videos on home and garden and hacking and different ideas that I just have or I've seen on the internet, and I like to try it myself to see how well it works. So if you do have a question about those, please become a public subscriber first, and I'll put you to the front of the line and try to answer your question as honestly and as accurately as possible. Have a great day.